Wish We Could Turn Back Time by Girlinpink44. Chapter 2, Unexpected Help.
Tones! How are we here?
The words echoed in Tony's head as his friend Orba dragged him into the waiting chopper. Honestly, Tony wasn't entirely sure if he could feel his legs, and his head was spinning at the implication. Maybe he was overthinking things. It wouldn't be the first time he had done something like that. Maybe he just misremembered what his friend said that day. It had been 15 years, so he was allowed to not remember the exact wording of conversations. That had to be it, because there was no way that he was lucky enough to have his best friend on whatever this was with him. Tony ducked into the helicopter and took the headphones Honey Bear offered him. He fastened his seatbelt, needing a little help from Brody because he had forgotten how he had thrown his shoulder on that landing. Honestly, considering that fall, if that's the worst that happened, he's pretty lucky. He's been through worse. Well, maybe not at this point in the timeline. The copter took off, and if Tony remembers, they've got a good few-hour flight ahead of them to a base in Germany. A hand on his knee causes him to jump slightly, and he turns to see Rhodey staring at him. But it's not the concern that he was expecting, or the relief at their reunion. There's shock. Confusion. Tony pauses and looks his friend in the eyes and feels his own widen. Rhodey's eyes are old. They're oddly reminiscent of the conversation they had had the week before all the time heist stuff happened. It had been a nice afternoon. Rhodey playing with his niece, checking on Tony, staying for dinner. It was one of the last bits of quiet he had had before his world got turned upside down, and had found himself in 2008 of all places. Not trusting his voice, he mimes the international symbol needing a pen. It takes a minute before that and a small notepad make their way into his hands. Tony stares at his best friend for a moment before writing a question that could change everything.
What year do you remember?
He hands the pen and pad over to Rhodey, wondering if they had met earlier in life, if they would have been the type to do this in class. Rhodey reads it over and pauses. He looks at Tony, and Tony meets his gaze. If he's right about his current hypothesis, his platypus needs to see whatever he needs to. Rhodey's eyes widen, and he quickly scribbles something before handing back the pad.
2023. You died.
Tony starts to laugh, tears out the page and sticks it in his pocket. Rhodey shakes his head at his friend, a fond smile, albeit a little teary. He leaned back in his seat, balancing the pad on his knee. Rhodey was back with him. He had his honey bear, his platypus, and his legs worked. Suddenly, Tony found some energy. He could stop it all, help his friend keep his legs, avoid so many of the failures he had had over the years, maybe figure out how to meet Peter and Harley early. The next month, really, until he had everything sorted out with Stain, was crucial. It laid the foundation for everything else. And then there was S.H.I.E.L.D. Or Hydra. The same thing at this point. Sure, Fury, Hill and Coulson were on the right side, but two of those he had no faith in, and the third wasn't much better. He needed new armor. The sooner, the better. Pepper may have a small point about his dependence on the suits, but with how insane the situation currently was, he didn't think she'd object. If she remembered. Honestly, he'd crossed that bridge when he came to it. But, in his gut, he suspected that she did. What he needed was to get somewhere he could properly freak out that wasn't a moving helicopter. Tony sat in the room Rhodey had brought him to, and Tony sat on the bed and leaned against the wall. For the first time in a long time, he felt oddly older in this body. Well, minus the electromagnet in his chest, which had him tasting coconut. Something he had grown to hate, and unable to take a truly deep breath. Perhaps reaching out to Helen Cho needed to move up on his to-do list. Between knowing a cardiothoracic surgeon who would do the necessary surgery and her cradle technology, recovery would go a lot smoother than it had before, and possibly leave less scarring. Though, if he was honest, the scar on his chest hadn't bothered him in later years, as people might have thought. It served as a reminder of Jensen's words in that cave all those years ago, yet just hours ago from where he stood at the moment. Luckily, Rhodey had given him the tablet he had come overseas with, so Tony could make a semblance of a to-do list, along with sketching rough ideas for the next Iron Man suit. Plus, figure out a game plan because Stain was still in a position of power in his company, and he wouldn't let that stand. The next few days were crucial. Maybe that's why the Stones had decided to land in there. Here lay the foundation for not only his journey as a hero, but for how the world saw Iron Man, for how they saw him, even how SI would fare in the years to come. And the world had no idea what was coming. Tony forced himself to breathe as deeply as he could and get his heart rate under control. Thanos was out there. Had he gotten started collecting the stones? From the monologue he had gotten on Titan, Tony knew the idea had already taken root in his head, and had been there for quite some time. But had he started to act on it? The door to the room opened, breaking Tony out of his thoughts, and he grinned when Rhodey walked in. Tony was fairly certain he would never grow tired of using the phrase Rhodey walked over ever again. His friend carried the trays and set them on the small table that sat near the end of the room. Grabbing a chair, he pulled it over and sat down, facing Tony, who was still sitting on the small bed.
Can't anyone hear us?
Tony looked around the room, not quite ready for the upcoming conversation, but at the same time ready to burst if he didn't get some of it off his chest.
No. Now, would you like to tell me how the hell we're back in 2008?
In a rare moment of just needing to be sure everything was real, Tony launched out of the bed. Rhodey stood, surprised, and Tony grabbed his best friend and hugged him. He wasn't sure who was more surprised by the action, himself or his best friend. While Morgan and Peter had made him more open to the idea of hugs, he still wasn't a huge fan of personal affection, unless it came from the aforementioned kid or Harley in a rare moment where he was feeling soft.
You're walking, platypus.
Tony felt the tears he had been holding for hours start to fall.
You're walking on your own.
The arms around him tightened for a second before Tony broke the hug. His friend was real. He was there. He remembered.
Tony wasn't alone in this. I'm walking.
His friend laughed, taking a seat. Tony grabbed the other chair and a French fry, which smelled heavenly.
I think that's more shocking than being 15 years in the past. But how is this possible? You were dead, and now you're not, and we're here, and...
Tony shrugged with his good shoulder, wincing at the slight soreness in the other.
I think it was the stones. Though, for the life of me, I don't know why.
Realizing he had too much pumped up energy, which didn't make sense. He should be exhausted. But instead he felt the need to pace, and began to do so.
I died. I was there.
Rhodey's voice was quiet, a familiar tone that even this time's Tony would have recognized.
I died. You were safe. Pepper was safe. Peter, Morgan, and Harley were safe. And so was Happy.
He turned to face his best friend.
I did what every parent said they would do, if need be. And I earned my rest. But maybe the stones sensed my regrets. I wouldn't see the boys graduate high school. Wouldn't see Morgan in school at all. Wouldn't be there for their milestones. But it was okay. They were safe. And Thanos was gone. But now, we can stop him before he snaps.
His friend's tone was firmer.
And you don't have to die.
Tony turned away, pacing towards the table, stealing another French fry from the plate, using it for a stalling technique both of them knew it was.
What if they don't remember? What if Pepper doesn't? Honey Bear, she's my PA right now. And I'm sitting here with memories of our lives together, and our kid, and the adopted strays we picked up along the way. And what if she doesn't remember? Then she doesn't, and you have to figure it out. But why would I remember?
Tony paused, turning back to his friend.
Because I thought of you. You, her, Happy, the kids. My family. You guys are my last thoughts. Tones.
He held up a hand.
I knew you'd keep an eye on them. I knew Pepper would be okay. I knew what I was doing when I snapped. But I guess the stones decided that wasn't enough. We can stop it all from happening.
Tony nodded.
I've thought the same thing. Once we get back to the States and figure out who all remembers, we can make a plan. Right now, I'm more focused on the next 48 hours.
The two shifted over to the table, Tony grabbing the tablet so he could show his friend his notes and they could start making plans. Stark Industries was mentioned, so was Rhodey's job in the Air Force, Stain and the events of the previous time, Pepper's role in things, the upcoming press conference and the board meeting, ideas for non-weapon military contracts. It had been a while since he had gotten to just sit down with his best friend and talk. Yes, the weight of the world was on their shoulders, but Tony noticed that it didn't feel quite as heavy as it once had. End of chapter. Hi guys, hope you enjoyed this one. Oh, I'm liking this. I love how they're basically brothers, you know. They might as well be, mightn't they? I've seen some fics where Rhodey's mum comes into the picture and basically is like, Tony, my boy. And but I can't read those because they're social media fics, which is a bummer, but what can you do? Anyway, you guys know the drill. Like, comment and subscribe and hit that bell to get notified for whenever I upload a new video. Have a good day, night, or whatever time zone you're in. Bye my guys, gals and non-binary pals. I'll see you in another video. Take care.